welcome to our 46th meeting of the BWS Stakeholder Advisory Group. And it's fantastic to be here with you all in person again, meeting in person. We've got a lot to cover today, and we're just gonna jump in. So a couple things, kind of a new setup on equipment. So the microphones are hot. You don't have to press a button or anything. I've been told being about 3 inches away from the mic is about a right distance, but you'll figure it out. Yeah, but they're all hot, and we're recording, so Bob, don't say anything about Kathleen. Helen, be nice to Shari. I mean, none of the stuff like last time, okay? So, no, seriously. Yeah, that's it. Oh, restrooms. Restrooms are outside there, and then make a right, and then go in the main entrance, and they're in the Bukkake Suites. Go out this door, and you either get an emergency exit or the security guards, which they tackle you, so don't do that. So yeah, out that door. You all know who I am. And I did the welcome part, so let's just move on. I am thrilled at this slide. I told everybody, this is my favorite slide in the whole slide deck, because I don't have to go through anything about being in a virtual meeting and do's and don'ts, and so I was just gonna delete the slide, but then I'm like, no, big red X. So our objectives for this afternoon. You're gonna hear an update on BWS's leak detection program. There were some references to that in our last meeting, so we thought let's bring the whole program out. We're going to do a little table exercise exploring indoor water use. You'll notice there's a bag of poker chips at your tables. Feel free to go, we'll use those in a bit, and if you want to start playing with them, you can take them out of the bags. I brought them over. I had them all in this big bag, and they're really heavy. I felt like the Brinks guy, with like all the money. But okay. You don't have to laugh at my jokes, it's okay. We're gonna do meeting notes. We're gonna talk a lot about the cost of service and water rate study. Gonna have some updates from the board. That's our plan. Any questions? All right. Opportunity for public comment on the agenda. Looking out there, Megan's like, yeah, I want to say. Megan says no. She's not gonna say anything. Okay. With that, Jason's up with an update on leak detection. If I can get the mic from the back, if somebody can grab that for Jason, that would be fabulous. Or it can be me. And maybe it works. And you can see them up here if you want.
Hey, good afternoon. Can you guys hear me? Yeah. Good afternoon, my name is Jason Kaido. I am the Program Administrator for the Field Operations Division. Here to give you a presentation on our leak detection program. So, traditionally, how we have done leak detection in the past is our team goes neighborhood by neighborhood, deploys their equipment, collects data, listens to the sound that's in our water pipes to detect any leaks. And they take that back to the office, evaluate the data to kind of see if there are any leaks in the system, and then they'll go out again and correlate to kind of pinpoint the leak, and then we'll do a repair after that. Okay. So the next, this slide and the next few will kind of show us that process. So here's a technician installing loggers. So the loggers will go on our valves or other assets that we have, meters. All it is pretty much just a microphone listening to the pipe, and they can pick up all the sound that's in the water. So when water normally flows through a pipe, you don't hear much sound because it's smooth flow through the pipe. So when there's a leak, that water is escaping the pipe, and it'll make a turbulent noise, and the microphone will pick up that noise, which is a telltale sign for a leak. And then once they kind of figure out where the leak is, they'll use sounding equipment. So basically they put on headphones and now they use another microphone that they kind of move along the ground. And as it gets louder, they'll be closer to the leak. And then they'll kind of, that's one way of identifying where the leak is. Another way they locate the leak is through a process called correlation. So on the screen to the left, you'll see what a typical correlating equipment set looks like. So you have like a, kind of like a computer box that they look at that analyzes data out in the field. And they'll put 2 of those sound loggers on either side of where we think the leak is. And based on how that sound travels between the 2 points, they can tell it's this far from this location and this far from this location. So it kind of pinpoints it where it is within those 2 loggers. Okay, and after that, a crew will come out and perform a repair. So here's some pictures of some repairs we do. Mains, and in the middle you see like a typical lateral leak. You see the water coming out. So we even do this kind of leak detection process now. So what's changed is in 2019, we did a pilot program for satellite leak detection. We're trying out a new technology. It costs about $300,000 over 2 years. And what the contract entailed was acquiring satellite imagery. So basically, it was a service provided by a company where we would pretty much buy satellite time. And the satellite would pass over the island, take a picture, and collect data. So what they're looking for is chlorine in the ground within about 6 feet of ground level. And that would kind of indicate a leak. And so once they analyzed our entire system of 2,100 miles, they gave us a leak report to kind of identify where these leaks are. So the goal of this project was to verify, does the satellite leak detection technology work and reduce non-revenue water and also increase our leak detection efficiency. So and here's kind of a visual of the process. So a satellite flies over, shoots down a beam, kind of penetrates the ground a little bit, and bounces back if there's any chlorine in the ground. And so that based on, it's like a black box. So at least to us, it's a black box. So the company will give us a point of interest, what we call a point of interest, where a potential leak would be. So the company claims their accuracy is within 600 feet diameter. And from there, on the right-hand side, you'll kind of see these are all the pipes within that 600-foot radius or diameter that now we can go out and do traditional leak detection on. So once we got our whole list of points of interest, we had like over 1,000. So we can't do that all 1,000 right away. So we came up with a way of prioritizing which points of interest to investigate first. So it included things like, was it an area where we had frequent main breaks in the past? Number of service laterals, how big was the pipe? We wanted to focus on the larger transmission lines because those we would have the biggest water loss. Also, we used our InfoMaster risk score, which is kind of like our pipe condition that the Water Resources Division uses in the hydraulic model, and also pipe material, because we know that some of the pipe materials are more prone to leaks than others. Okay, so the results of our pilot program were, previously we we used the metric of how many miles of pipeline we investigated. Okay, so in 2019, the last full year we did, just a neighborhood by neighborhood, we investigated 358 miles and found 255 leaks for 0.7 leaks per mile we investigated. So in the 2020 year where we used, the full year where we used the satellite leak detection, we investigated 120 miles, found 344 leaks for 2.9 leaks per mile. So we ended up being 4 times more efficient in finding leaks in our system. Okay. So going back to the goals, were we able to verify that the technology works? Yes. Did we reduce the amount of non-remaining water? Yes, because we found more leaks. And we were also able to increase the efficiency of our leak detection team. So our leak detection team uses this dashboard when they do their work. So in the picture of the island, you can see all the different points of interest that we had. So we had a total of 1,566 points of interest that we got from the satellite. And we found, to date, 1,638 leaks. So over the 3-year period since we started the pilot program, we found a lot more leaks. And we also found 50 leaks on main lines. So that's important because it's the main lines that cause the catastrophic main breaks, the property damage, and the largest community disruption when you do break. Okay, so we're able to get to them before they break, catastrophically and kind of reduce cost and risk. So our next steps, we are developing a contract right now to permanently incorporate satellite leak detection into our operations. And we're scheduling 2 satellite passes a year. And in order to handle the increased workload, because you saw from the the chart that we still have outstanding points of interest to evaluate. Some of them are kind of growing scale, so we want fresh data, and we want to be able to evaluate that fresh data within a reasonable amount of time. So to do that, we would like to increase the size of our leak detection team. So we currently have 4 people on our leak detection team, and we're thinking of increasing it by 2 in order to give us enough bodies to handle the additional workload. And with that, I'll open it up to any questions. Yes.
What's considered a significant leak? In other words, if it's a couple of drops, it's an insignificant number. And the other question that popped in my mind was, you talked about getting it early before it becomes catastrophic, I think were the words you used. So what is the standard progression on or how does that progression generally happen?
So your first question on what's the size of the significant leak? Kind of comes down to how we prioritize this, how we investigated the leaks. Our prioritization. So we wanted to focus on the larger diameter pipes so that those would tend to have the larger leaks. Rather than if you have like a lateral or a coupling, you're talking only like a 1-inch pipe versus something 42 inches. So it would make more sense for us to look at the 42-inch, the larger pipes first. But it also depends on other factors in the system, like what's the pressure, how close it is to a reservoir, where it would drain the reservoir. So we kind of took all that into account as we kind of developed our work plan on how we would evaluate which parts of the system to investigate first. Your second question on, can you repeat your second question?
Well, if you detected a leak and you said, well, we'll come back and take a look at that a little later, and it's in the process of becoming a larger leak, you use the word catastrophic, but the point is, at what point does a small leak turn into a major leak? I mean, do you have like 6 months?
No, some of these can be years.
Yeah, okay, that's kind of.
Yeah, and it just depends on how big that crack in the pipe or that hole in the pipe propagates. Sometimes it'll take a long time, sometimes it'll be short. So it all depends on where the pipe is, how old it is, what material.
Yes.
So the real question is, how do you take this data and prioritize which lines you're gonna fix first? So what's the next step, in other words?
So in terms of the capital project, so this is just repairing the existing system. When we talk about replacement, that's based on our water resources long-range planning group. And they take the InfoMaster score where we had previous main breaks. And that's how they determine which areas of the system to replace next. So if there's been historically main breaks in a certain neighborhood, that would be one area where we would focus replacing those pipes next.
Do you take into consideration what that leak feeds though? Because, I mean, it's great. I can have a 24-inch line out in the middle of nowhere feeding nobody and it's got a leak in it. And it's a big leak. But I could care less if you fix that today, but I really do care if you fix the 24-inch small leak in front of the school.
Yeah, so that's one of the things we look at when we prioritize is how many customers is that pipe serving.
Okay, so there is a formula, if you will, or a plan for how to take this data and
Yes.
prioritize, not just by size of the leak.
Yes, correct.
Yeah, I can you hear? Yeah, a little closer to the microphone. Even closer.
Even closer.
Even closer.
Do I have
You,
to-
yeah.
do I have to open my mouth and swallow this? But Cynthia, to your point, you know, in the prioritization of pipes for the CIP program, or the capital program for replacement, we do it on doing a risk analysis. And one of the factors is consequence of failure. So like you said, the location near a school, or even worse yet, my worst nightmare, the pipeline is under the freeway, it would shut down the freeway, the H1 going west. So that's high priority to say address that. This information, when they do the repairs, also from this program, the leak detection program, or any main break repair, they'll have a chance to look at the condition of the pipeline. So if it looks like the pipeline is in really bad shape, then we need to take action. Then we can bump up the prioritization for the replacement of the pipeline. So all of this information is kind of feeding into our decision making on our prioritization. But the initial priority list is generated based on risk scores. And that's the methodology under the Water Master Plan. Thank you.
Any other questions for Jason? Yeah, Sharon. And then Cheryl, and then Bob.
Did you have any false positives, like points of interest where there wasn't?
Yes. So if you look at the graph at the top left, okay, so the red is how many leaks we found, the green is how many we have yet to investigate, the purple is how many we didn't find a leak. So it was a little bit over 50-50 when we did an investigation, when we found a leak. That is a higher hit rate than what the vendor kind of assumed, right? How they kind of marketed it.
Cheryl?
I was curious how it compares cost-wise compared to your traditional way.
Use the microphone
Oh,
too.
sorry. Just curious how doing this new way with the satellite compares cost-wise.
I think the best way of looking at it is for the $307,000. So we found 50 leaks on mains. So if that prevented $307,000 in claims, I think it was worth it going through the satellite intervention.
So it's more expensive then?
It's an added cost, but that added $300,000 you hope is saving money from increased claims. If a leak is a lot easier to repair than a blowout, so you spend less time repairing the pipe. So all of those things kind of add up little by little to add up to make it value for the 300,000.
Doesn't take much time and much disruption of traffic and inconvenience of people to make up for $300,000. And Bob?
So I know a company that has thousands of dollars worth of water bills every month, and they're reasonably sure that they have a lot of leaks. And clearly they're not all tricked out with the stuff that you have. What would you recommend that they do to try and locate their leaks and fix them?
There are a lot of companies that do leak detection services. I don't think I can say their names.
Well, it's not an endorsement. It's a,
Maybe we can follow up afterwards with that.
Hmm?
Maybe we can follow up afterwards with some suggestions. All right, and Chase.
Can I add something else to what?
Yeah.
To your point, also with the satellite leak detection, it's kind of like we are doing leak detection for the whole island. Because the satellite looks at the whole island at once, whereas before, you're just looking at the neighborhood, right? So it's like a screening tool. And then from there, we focus on areas we know have a higher probability of finding a leak.
There were a few questions that I had in regards to the total cost of the project. Does that only include the software, or is that also staff costs?
That is just the vendor's cost.
And then to follow up on that, with the two added positions that you're looking to add, there are about 286 points of interest that were not investigated. Are you thinking that you can get to 100% investigations of all PUIs if you have that extra two staff?
Yes, so the kind of goal would be, if we do a satellite pass every 6 months, is with the additional 2 staff members who evaluate all the POIs within that 6-month period, and then get a new snapshot and look at the next 6-month work within the 6 months.
And what you're saying is the return on investment going forward will benefit the whole system, the whole?
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, great questions. Allison, last one.
Okay, for the false,
Positives, did you find anything in common when you didn't find any? Like, is the area that made it like hit or something, or like the type of depth or something like that?
Not really. There wasn't any commonality between, because you're talking about over 500 locations where they didn't have it. So it's kind of hard to find commonality between all 500. So the company kind of estimates a hit rate of about 25%, so 1 in 4. So we were 50%, so we are well above their kind of the goal that they have for their customers.
All right, great job, thank you. Appreciate it, round of applause for Jason. Next up, we're gonna dig into water rates now, and Joe's gonna start us off.
Okay, greetings. Okay, so we're going to talk about the objectives. I guess first I know that those of you who were here 5 years ago or something when we did this last, we talked a lot about water rates. and developed a lot of water rates. So for some of you, this will be, a new experience, and for others, it will be an old experience that you'll revisit. So if you have any questions along the way, please feel free to ask. Dave may chime in if he thinks that maybe he wants to add something to but we'll just go through this. We want to talk about the objectives. What are the deductions? And when we, I'll go through the objectives. What are the deductions to the O&M and the CIP budget that are appropriate and acceptable? Because we're going to come up with water rates that we want to be affordable. And we're going to come up with what it costs us to serve that water. And are we in a kind of crisis that was anticipated by the long-range financial plan? If so, is this acceptable to temporarily drop the working capital requirements? Many of you remember that we developed several financial plans. One of them was in the long-range financial plan, and one of them was to maintain a certain reserve level of cash in case something such as a hurricane happened. I guess we have some other crises occurring right now. They're not hurricanes, and do those qualify for dipping into these reserves? And then finally, should we consider non-uniform rate increases across the residential tier? And that's just what Dave did this exercise for with you, because there are different tiers, and if we look at raising water rates or setting water rates, do we want to do that uniformly across all the tiers and across all the categories, or do it in a non-uniform pattern? Again, to refresh your memory, there are three processes or three steps in determining in rate making. The first is the revenue requirement, and that's determining how much money we need on an annual basis to do operations and maintenance, and also to do our capital improvements. Then we do the cost of service. We've already kind of discussed that, and we're maintaining our current cost of service allocation. That's a different cost that a residential customer might use versus a commercial customer. And then finally, we design the rates. Again, that goes into how much each different tier, what the rates for each different tier are to, again, reach our revenue requirements. And so we're going to start with the first bubble, the first task, determining the revenue requirement. And you might remember there are four major categories. We have, again, operations and maintenance. Those are the daily in and out costs, the leak detection and repair, main break detection, the power cost to pump water, etc. We have capital expenses, which are generally paid with either cash or debt borrowing. We have reserves and working capital, and we have trends and risks that we want to assess. Like I said, we'll start with operations and maintenance. And this slide kind of shows the impact of inflation on our operations budget. When we start back in 2019, which was when we did our last rate study, everything we'll say was basically at zero. You can follow the and the bar graphs. The bars show what our rate increases were forecast. We had 0% the first year. We had 2% the next 2 years, and then we had 4% rate increases the following 2 years. The blue bars show the inflation for those years. The line graphs show the blue line on top shows the average cost of inflation, how inflation has driven our average cost up over the last 5 years. So basically a little bit over 20%. The yellow line shows what our cumulative rate increases were over the same period of time, or again about 12%. And so the bottom red line shows how much further we've fallen behind over the last 5 years over inflation. So basically we're about 7.5%. We've lost purchasing power of about 7.5% over the last 5 years, just based on what our projections were 5 years ago. One of the significant issues one of the significant drivers of this increase is power cost. And I think we all are aware of that. The cost of oil and coal has gone up, or the cost of power in general has gone up. At the top purple line, or the purple graph, kind of shows our usage of kilowatt hours over this period of time. And you connect from 2001 to 2023. And so while it goes up and down, depending on the month, whether it's raining and we're pumping more, and we're pumping less, or it's dry and we're pumping more, whether it's summer and we need to pump more and use more power or not. But you can see in general, the purple line is trending down. And I guess that represents the Board of Water Supply's effort in trying to control costs and control our power consumption. Our consumption has gone down. We've also instituted solar energy PV panels on some of our facilities. The white line, jogging up through the center of the graph, represents the cost per kilowatt hour. So that represents how much we have to pay for the power that we're using. And you see that it is kind of climbing sharply. And so then the orange line on the bottom represents what our actual costs have been when you combine those two. So in general, our electric costs have gone up about, $10 million over budget this year. They've gone up about, as you can see, 12%, 12 to 15% a year they consume 12 to 15% of our budget every year. So it's grown proportionately, probably about 3% over the last 5 years. And so this is one of the major drivers of our operating costs. Another cost that we've talked about, which is somewhat unanticipated 5 years ago, well, maybe it was anticipated, but we really didn't believe it was going to happen. But maybe it was more we hoped it wouldn't happen, is the Red Hill incidents and our response to Red Hill. And I think in previous meetings, we've talked about both gross ballpark estimate of how much this will cost the Board of Water Supply to respond to this is about $200 million. About $30 million of that is to develop monitoring wells and to develop more information about how the contaminants are moving within the water. And then another $195 million is how much it would cost to develop another 17.5 million gallons of capacity a day if we have to replace our major water sources. The additional capital costs and the additional operating costs that this might entail, really aren't in the calculations yet. We don't really know whether the Navy or the federal government will pick up the tab on any of this. They haven't really committed to us personally to do that, despite what some of the implications in some of the media releases are. And then finally, yes, we have worked with our congressional delegations and in trying to get additional funding, additional federal funding, additional legislation to help defer the cost of this response, of this issue, crisis. Another impact, and this is a new impact, which is really just, I don't think this was specifically on the radar screen, although I guess some people such as Irwin might have been looking at it for quite a few years, is PFAS. Some of you may have heard that in the news. PFAS are sometimes referred to as forever chemicals. Let's see, can I try to pronounce it? Polyfluoroalkyl substances. It's in firefighting foam. Over on the graphic on the right, PFAS are in everything. And so it's really a pretty common chemical, although it's more recently we've discovered it's been introduced into the water system or into the water aquifers through, again, things like firefighting foam and other leaks that have occurred. So these are everyday things. The EPA is putting this on their list of emerging contaminants. And so up until now, we really haven't had any specific guidelines or requirements to test for PFAS or to limit it in your water. But the EPA is studying that and trying to come up with specific guidelines on how much PFAS can be detected in a potable water source. And so those guidelines will be coming out, I think, in the next 6 months or so, and we'll have maybe a couple of years to
Joe,
react.
sorry, actually, they're not guidelines, actually, they're drinking water standards. That by the end of the year, I think their intent right now is to pass drinking water standards for 6 PFAS chemicals. So, yeah, thank you, Joe.
Thank you, yes, the technical issues are important, so it's standards that you have to, it's not guidelines, which I guess imply that they're voluntary, they would be standards, which would be
These standards
mandatory.
These will be enforceable standards, so like for the PFOA and PFOS, if you cannot provide drinking water to the public if your levels are above 4 parts per trillion. So you'll have to look at treatment. We currently have, found low levels of PFAS chemicals in 6 BWS wells. Thanks.
And I'll just emphasize that all of those were below the maximum level or the action level to,
If there's an interest, we can do a presentation on PFAS at another meeting, but as already mentioned, the proposed maximum contaminant level is 4 parts per trillion is part of it, and I just wanted to give a visual of what a part per trillion is. If you dug a trench around the entire 227-mile shoreline of the island, and it was 2 feet wide and a foot deep, and you put 1 drop of food coloring in it, that's a part per trillion. It's teeny, 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 tiny. All right.
and so we need to detect 4 drops in that moat around the
So,
and we can laugh, but that's important. I mean, I guess that's an issue of how sensitive this is and how important clean water is to our island. But that also is a potential additional cost. Just the testing alone would be an additional cost. And if we have to take further action to treat that and remove those or to reduce that to an acceptable level is another potential cost. And so we're faced with the dilemma of trying to balance both having water service that is dependable and adequate and the cost of maintaining that, the cost of maintaining infrastructure, the cost of the operations and maintenance, and at the same time keeping rates affordable. And so, these things weigh themselves. We've talked about staying on plan, in which case, well, no, actually we've talked about having revenue increases in excess of 12 or 13%. That would be how much it would cost perhaps to stay on our 30-year water master plan, to continue replacing pipelines to reach our goal of 21 miles a year, to meet our working capital targets, to maintain our strong bond ratings. And we'd like to congratulate ourselves that we're the only agency in the state of Hawaii that has not 1, but 2 AAA ratings, which also helps us lower our borrowing costs, and to maintain or improve our levels of service. And then of course, we have to weigh those with, like I said, affordability, and we can have no rate increases, which is always, I don't want to say it's an option, but if we had no rate increases, our bond ratings would drop. We would lose the ability to borrow efficiently to replace our infrastructure. It would actually probably bring our capital improvement program to a near halt. It would also cut our operating expenses by 16%, which would probably, I don't even fathom guess how we would do that. But it would cut our operating expenses, and then it would result in interruptions to water service. We wouldn't have as much leak detection. We would be slower to respond to main breaks, and so people would be out of water. So the dilemma again is how to balance these things. And if we were to forego all rate increases, we would be faced with bigger rate increases to make up for that lost time, for that loss of income, that lost revenue requirement at a later date, which would potentially be much more expensive.
So I think the challenge, and most of that stuff we had showed in previous meetings over the past few months, right? And so the challenge that the board has been faced with, well, if 13% per year over year for the next 5 years, that sounds really expensive. And at the other end of the spectrum, 0% doesn't work. Then is there something that's more in between, or some alternative that's palatable or more palatable? And so I think that it's that premise that really sets up the stage for where Joe's heading next year.
Yes, we value your feedback on how we can bridge these gaps and balance these competing interests. And again, this is a graph that kind of shows where our operating and maintenance costs have been. Again, the top line is our budgeted expenses over the last 10 years, and you can see the orange line, and you can see that it's risen by about 3.8% over that time. And the bottom graph, the green line, is our actual expenses, which have risen a little bit faster over time. But we have managed to actually cut costs and contain costs so that our costs have been, within reason over the last. And then,
Joe, I just want to be clear. That's those numbers in terms of the budget and actual increases, 3.8%. That's the average increase per year over the 10-year period. So those are annual increases.
And so if we project those out over the next 5 years, we can see that some proposed budget increases on the graph is a purple line, and then we can see what proposed budget increases of perhaps 0.2% the first year, and then if we increase in the next 4 years at the expected inflation rate, which are given there at 4.5% in 2025, 4% in 2026, 3.5% in 27 and 28. So just maintaining our expenses in line with the inflation rate would drive our projected maintenance costs up by the purple line to almost $250 million a year.
So I think what the board has done here is to say, what's the least amount that we think we could get by with on operations and on our operating budget? And so if you look at that purple line, it's at about the same place as the orange line, right? The purple line starts about where the orange line ends. So it looks like the same dollar amount, but we have about a 5% inflation rate happening. So in effect, it's a 5% cut in the budget from the year we're in to next year. And then if you look at what the projected increases are annually and the inflation rate, they're equal. Essentially, it's a flat budget, right? It's just keeping pace with inflation. There's no real increase in that budget. So it's a very tight operating budget.
And that takes us through our operating budget, and so you can see where we're looking at just maintaining operations over the next 5 years. And then we turn our eyes to the capital improvement budget. And this is just a graph this is just a table of our proposed capital improvement spending and where that money is coming from. So over the next 5 years from FY24 through FY28. And you can see down at the bottom, our capital spending ranges from around $199 million in the first year to $240 million in the fifth year. It goes up and down a little bit. We have different funding options that we're exploring. The top line shows what we call pay-go, or the money that's just coming directly from our revenue sources. And that average is around $40 million to $80 million a year. And then we issue bonds to help us pay off those loans, and we get low interest SRF loans. We are pursuing a WIFIA loan. WIFIA is a new program, a new low interest flexible financing program from the federal government. We're expecting to get around $73 million from that program. We have grants of around $19 million and ARPA funding of $25 million. We really like those funding sources because those are grants that we do not have to pay back, unlike loans, which we do have to pay back. And then we have the special expendable fund, which is amounts that new construction, new developments pay when they initially hook up to our water system. So we add all these up and we come up with what we think is, again, the minimum proposed capital spending budget that we are looking at. And again, we want to go back and compare that to where we've been in the past. And this graph shows, again, we're in the blue and the purple bars kind of show the rate setting periods. They're 5-year periods, so they're just illustrating these time frames. The blue line graph shows the capital budget that we adopted 5 years ago. We called it PL2. It was to replace pipelines and to reach a replacement rate of 21 miles a year within 10 years. And again, that was done to reduce the number of main breaks so that we can provide efficient and affordable water. And then you can see the orange line over in the blue was the existing CIP budget that we originally proposed. You can see it goes up and down a little bit, but in general, it maintained about the same volume or about the same cumulative cost as the proposed rate. And then the black line is our minimum proposed CIP in 2016 dollars. And you can see even though it seemed large in the previous slide, when you put it in 2016 dollars, especially in FY27, it drops down really low, and it does not keep up with our original proposed pipeline master plan. These are just decisions we've tried to, or scenarios that we've tried to plan as to what do we do, how do we change or modify the CIP to meet the current standards or the current challenges we have, such as, like I said, the rising power costs, the reaction responses to Red Hill, to potential PFAS contaminations, and the other challenges, the rising interest rates, which are perhaps higher than we expected.
Joe,
Before. Not close enough?
Yeah, just one more comment on this slide. This is what the rate increase 5 years ago has paid for, right? These were decisions that you all weighed in on them. The orange line is what was actually budgeted as a result of that. Now we're at this decision point here, right? That's really why we're talking about this. We're at this decision point for what do the next 5 years look like.
And now I get to say thank you. Are there any questions? And I'll turn it over to Dave to carry on to the decision point. Oh, I have a question.
The one column that looked really inviting was the one with the $19 million grant, but that was the only thing in that whole column running out. And my question is, what do you do to acquire more grants? It looks like that might be a fertile area to put some energy.
Okay. And Dave, maybe you can advance to my section on that one slide. So very good question. You always ask good questions. Everybody asks good questions here. So realizing the situation, we have inflation, supply chain disruptions that are still pandemic, and even probably war in Ukraine, and now the issues in China. And also, we are having to deal with crises. Red Hill, the first crisis, now potentially PFAS. We have a detection at 6 BWS wells. We don't know how many more wells could be impacted. We have the potential now to install, maybe facing the requirement in the future, to install treatment systems to remove PFAS, especially PFOA and PFOS, the two most problematic out of the 6 that the EPA has identified. And try to get that to lower levels, maybe below detection definitely below 4 parts per trillion. So those costs are not reflected yet in this program, actually. But what I've decided is, what we need to look, and it's something we haven't really done aggressively, we need to look to external sources of funding that don't come necessarily from our BWS ratepayers like ourselves. People that pay the water bills have been actually funding the whole operation and maintenance of, and replacement of our capital infrastructure, funding the annual operation of the whole water system island-wide. But we have to actually now be more aggressive in pursuing dollars that we don't have to repay that come from the federal government or other sources. So those are the opportunities we're looking for. And this slide kind of reflects, and maybe Raylan, you can stand up, please. Raylan Kobayashi, the head of our executive support office. Oh yeah, you can come up and explain this slide and actually give her an opportunity to talk about this. This is just the beginning of what we're doing. I just want, before I turn it over to Ray, I do want to acknowledge that we, Ashley Show covered, we have gotten $50.3 million of federal funds, grant funds, something we never had before, at least in my 11 years as a manager. And that's something that is not on the backs of our ratepayers, but is from the federal government. Thank you to the mayor and to the city council. Ray?
Thank you, Ernie. So yes, we are pursuing grants. The ARPA stands for the American Rescue Plan Act. So these were infusions of funds that came after COVID. So we got $50 million for 5 construction or design projects. We're pursuing what the federal government calls congressionally directed spending. They used to be called earmarks before, but now our congressional leaders can specifically advocate for federal funding for projects. So it's an 80-20 split if we can get it. So we put in requests for those congressionally directed spending appropriations for a total of $15 million. I hope to hear back by, I guess, well, they'll set their budget by the September-October timeframe, so hopefully we'll know. And thank you to, we received 30 letters of support, some from our stakeholder advisory groups, from people in the community, from legislators, so we have high hopes for that. This is the first, well, not the first time, we've tried this before, but we're hoping to be more successful with the congressionally directed spending. We're also watching 2 bills right now in the state legislature for funding, and I'm sorry, this was through second crossover, but things changed so quickly. But House Bill 1511 is currently in conference right now, and that would provide $10 million of funding. Right now, the draft that I just saw that they're conferring over is $10 million in funding from the state. So again, it's not, and they removed the dollar for dollar match, I hope, but we'll see what comes out of conference. And then House Bill 300 is their general appropriations bill. That also has some money for the Board of Water Supply. At last I saw, it was $5 million state general obligation funds and $5 million BWS match for that same $10 million. Joe and Ernie both mentioned we have that WIFIA, it's a low interest financing program, relatively new at the EPA, so we've been invited to apply. So it's not free money, but it is another very low interest way to finance. And the drinking water SRF program, which we expect to also be infused with money from the bipartisan infrastructure law, which I don't think they're calling it bill anymore, but whatever they ended up calling it, there was supposed to be an infusion into the drinking water SRF programs of federal funds, and those would be, I don't know what you call it, capitalization. Well, you don't have to pay back. So part of that loan would be principal forgiveness, but we have yet to see, I guess, how DOH is going to manage that. But we have our eyes on it for sure, and everything that we can explore, we are working very hard to try to get all these applications in. The more we reach out and we apply to, we're learning about the process, how to pitch these things. So it's been a learning experience, but we're trying, definitely.
So, Cynthia, go ahead. Oh, and Ray to back.
Yes, I'm there.
Hi, Ray.
Hi.
Are
Are you aware that WIFIA also does grants now? It's not just low interest, but they are doing grants. I think that's been within the last year or so. So they're doing both. And if, I know I get all of the EPA, here's what we're doing here and there and everywhere. But there have been a number of grants that have been given out across the United States. So don't just assume that it's going to be low interest. See if you can go ask for it as a grant. There have been some big ones out there, like in the $200 million range.
Thank you, Cynthia, and feel free to just email those to us anytime you see run across those. You know, we're looking for, we're doing that proverbial look under every rock and see what we can get. Grants will take over loans any day. Free money, not on the backs of our ratepayers. So this is kind of the strategy going forward for the Board of Water Supply. We have to look outside our utility. The other area that we're like in kindergarten right now is to learn the federal congressional process to get these funding opportunities, different programs they create in Congress, and then also how to get these earmarked appropriations and other opportunities. So building that expertise, we're at the beginning stages right now, but we look to try to get to high school at some point in time on this. Well, yes, wait, let's, Cynthia, if we can let Dana go first. Dana?
Yeah, I was just gonna throw in, so you guys may be aware, but probably not everyone in the room. So Hawaii Community Foundation has been trying to help in this arena. And we do have folks on contract helping to track federal funding opportunities. We're happy to connect with you and your staff to help you guys kind of expand that out. We have been working with other county utility agencies across the state, and we were notified, though are still pending the award letter, that we are going to be designated an environmental finance center by EPA, and so we will be able to help do a lot more of that soon once we get the money coming in. But even now, we're already working with folks, so we would be very happy to work with you guys.
Yeah, thank you, Dana, from the Hawaii Community Foundation. Board of Water Supply has been part of the Freshwater Council for, is it now 8 or 9 years? Barry and I here, so we'll continue this important partnership for the good of our community. Cynthia?
The other question I was going to ask was, when is the Board of Water Supply affected by BABA? Build America, or Buy America, Build America. Because I know that there have been pockets of the industry that have been able to successfully delay the implementation of BABA for their industries for up to a year. And I know that's a significant impact because when you have to implement BABA, that means especially all of your steel products, all of that kind of stuff, now pretty much has to be sourced US, which restricts going for fair price markets. So I don't know whether or not you've taken a look at that as part of the whole water industry to see whether or not there could be a delay in implementation of that to give us some breathing room after the pandemic to recover economically across the board. But that's another area to take a look at.
Yes, what she's referring to, I always get this kind of mixed up. Build America, Buy America, or Buy America, Build America. BABA, B-A-B-A. A federal requirement on use of federal funds that you have to be in compliance. And this is what they call, in this category, called cross-cutters. We have to meet the federal requirements that come with the money. So the federal dollars have strings with them. And sometimes those strings are difficult to comply with. But we're experienced in doing that with SRF. But WIFIA, in talking to the EPA on our WIFIA loan, like this loan that we're looking at, Joe, was it $104 million or $105 million?
That was the amount our letter of interest was, and with the loan up, I think there is a possible waiver.
And then we may qualify for some of our projects. So we're kind of looking for the projects that I think were in planning stages from May of 2022, before May of 2022, and we could be exempt from the LAVA requirements, which are helpful projects, like our seawater desal project with WIFIA funds. The other advantage of WIFIA, and I love the idea of grants, because we're going to ask EPA that question, it can go as long as 30 or 35 years. The current SRF program that we have with the Department of Health, they allow a payback period of only up to 20 years. And we want to push them to go to 30 years, because if we can spread it out over a longer period of time, that reduces the costs on existing customers.
Perfect, thank you. I want to bring us back to this discussion because we need your input on a lot of other things. As you can see, the board is taking some really aggressive efforts to pursue outside funding, grant money, and the potential for those of you who calculate ROIs for a really high ROI on raised salary. So fingers crossed for that, right? But where we are today is at kind of this inflection point in trying to decide decisions going forward and what level of funding should there be for over this next 5-year period for capital projects, for renewal and replacement of infrastructure, and for the operating budget. And so we've analyzed that. I guess the other element in here to think about is reserves and working capital. And for those of you who went through the last process with us, one of the financial policies that this group recommended the board adopt is a working capital policy, which says the objective is to maintain 180 days of cash on hand, right? Like you have money under your mattress. And the purpose for that is to provide funds for unplanned events. Things like big increases in interest rates, things like big increases in electricity costs, things like a global pandemic, things like Red Hill, right? That's what it was intended for, in addition to natural disasters. And so thinking about that, okay, then the target that was established in the policy was to achieve that 180 days cash on hand over a 10-year period, because what you're doing is you're raising rates along the way and you're hanging on to some of that money to build up those reserves. And then it also says, and the goal is to maintain a minimum of 60 days cash on hand, okay? So sticking to that policy or not has a big impact on how much revenue you need to bring in each year. So we've looked at the operating budget that Joe showed you, the minimum capital improvement budget that Joe showed you, and we've analyzed it 2 different ways. One is sticking to that 60-day working capital requirement, that minimum 60-day requirement, and the other is saying, hey, maybe we're in this period of time where it makes sense to draw down on some of that and use some of that money we saved to maintain rate affordability and help recover. So I'm going to show you those 2 alternatives right now. This is looking at maintaining the 60 days working capital, and it's down on the bottom line. You can see at the end of each of these next 5 years, fiscal years 24 through 28, at the end of the period, the 60 days working capital is maintained. To do that in fiscal year 24, the increase in revenues that would be needed is 19.4%. You see Cheryl going, wow. I agree, that's a big number, right? So, and then it drops down in the next year because the amount of spending in the capital program is changing, the amount of money being borrowed. So we haven't done rate smoothing here. It's just to show what would be needed in each year to maintain that 60 days working capital. So 19.6% in the first year, then 3.6, 1.2, then back up 6.6, and then 7.8 after that. So massive jumpiness, right, in the annual rate increases. Not very business friendly, not very consumer friendly, and a really big number. The next slide is going to show if we put some flex in that. So here, you can see that in the Rather than 60 days working capital in fiscal year '24, we let it drop down to 35. And we did that by spending down some of the cash the board already has. You can see there's the revenues, point to it. This line here is at negative $10 million. So spending down $10 million of existing cash means the days of working capital drops. And so on and so forth. And then to do this and gradually build back up to that 60 days at the end of the 5-year period, we're looking at year-over-year increases of 8.4%. Okay, so big difference on if you let that policy flex. Okay, so here's the questions that we really need some input on. Do those reductions in O&M and capital spending that you were looking at strike an appropriate balance between infrastructure investments and maintaining rate affordability? And as we recover from this multi-pronged crisis, is it acceptable to temporarily drop below the working capital targets to maintain rate affordability? Bob?
The question I would have.
I want
is
answers,
if you have
not
a worst
questions.
case, if you have a worst case scenario.
Yeah.
Which, this 60 days is kind of designed to be able to deal with that. Let's assume that you didn't get your income or water problems or what have you. What are your fallbacks for raising capital to continue with the operations? Now, you have your working capital pocket, but let's say it runs out. Where do you go then?
So next year you're at 9 days, let's say, and then a hurricane hits. That's your question.
Whatever it
Yeah.
is.
Joe, you want to answer that?
Thanks, Dave. Well, no, I think we go back and sharpen our pencils and look at the budget again. I think the first thing we start to do is perhaps defer some of our capital projects and defer whatever non-essential services there are. Yes, that is a situation we hope doesn't occur because yes, you're right, we spent out our cushion, but at the same time, I think that's that we kind of see now that this may be one of those emergency situations. We don't want it to be a triple emergency, but it is one of those situations.
Thanks, Joe. Good question, because that's something that we have to face as a reality. What do we do if we get a direct hit by Category 4 hurricane on Oahu? And our water system is essential for people, the 1 million people here on Oahu to survive. So what we do, whatever's remaining in the working capital, we put it to work. Our revenue fund or cash funded CIP projects, we look at maybe deferring or even canceling existing projects that are underway, maybe haven't started construction. Sorry, Cheryl, the DCA won't like this. But if we need to generate cash revenue, because if there's a major hurricane hit, we may not be able to bill customers for water. And that'll curtail and turn off the faucet for the revenue stream coming in to pay for operations in our capital program. So we have to sacrifice something. So that's another option. The other option, so defer cash funded CIP, perhaps even canceling some projects that haven't started actual construction and using that money to pay for our expenses to respond to the disaster. The other area is insurance, property insurance. And Ray, the ESO office, they go out and solicit policies for us. And right now, we're talking about perhaps increasing the policy amount to provide coverage. The other program that's available that'll come in with a major disaster is something called the Stafford app. So when there's a major disaster like a direct hurricane hit, first the governor would declare a state of emergency. The next step, the state of Hawaii would request the president to declare an emergency. And once the president declares an emergency, then FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Service, part of the Department of Homeland Security, they would bring their resources to the table. And they have a program called the Public Assistance Program. Basically a grant program to help defray some of the expenses or costs that the local government or the people are experiencing on the public side. So we look at those opportunities. Ray, did I miss any other area of potential funding?
I think we're done then.
Okay.
Great.
The one thing,
Yeah, go ahead.
the one thing about our capital program, we control the timing of the projects. We may not just say, because we're gonna cancel these projects, they go away. The need for the projects still remain. It's a matter of when do we program those projects to be implemented in the future. We can adjust that. So we use that to adjust it and create rates that are not gonna go up and down with our capital program, but it will increase in a smooth, more incremental basis. Thank you.
Thanks. I want to focus questions on these two things. Cynthia,
I don't necessarily have a
can you
problem.
move a little closer?
I don't necessarily have a problem with going into this as an emergency situation. The only thing I have a problem with on this chart is going down to 9 days. And the only reason I have a problem with that is typically that is not even one salary period for your employees. And anytime your reserves get below at least one pay period, I think you're asking for disaster there. So I don't have an objection to going into the reserves. I do have a concern how deeply you've gone, at least in that 1 year, before you start building up again.
So the idea of a floor of at least a pay period is what I heard. Great.
That pay period would be like 14 days. We pay people every 2 weeks.
Exactly. And here you only have 9 days worth of money on hand. So that says that if something happens, you just cut your employees' necks off while we're in the middle of a disaster, which means they get all crazy trying to help with everybody else's disaster.
Yeah, thank you. Meeting payroll is very important, because we need these employees to show up to work to
Yeah.
help respond and restore water service to our island. But like I said earlier, we have cash-funded CIP that we can defer to generate cash.
It's a point well taken.
But it's a good point.
Yeah,
Thank you.
other comments? Would you all think about that drop in the, when you look back at when you look back to where we were in the water master planning process and that 30-year CIP, and looking at the level of funding that's proposed for capital projects in there? That's really one of the questions here. That seem okay for the time being, kind of postpone those things? Given where things are, is that too deep of a cut? What are your thoughts? Cheryl?
I guess I'll chime in. Yeah, I think it's realistic. Just, I meet with Ernie pretty frequently, and just based on the level of staffing available and the ability to actually get to 21 miles a year, I think it's has to be pushed farther out because of the staffing challenges that they have. So it seems realistic. And that was going to be my question, is that, have you taken that into account, or is that, projecting out that you'll be fully staffed for the capital projects this year?
Yeah, Cheryl, I couldn't have planned it better. Thank you for raising that point about what she's talking about is our capacity staff-wise to deliver on the capital program, to oversee the design contracts, the design, and also the construction. And that's where we're facing serious challenges, workforce challenges right now. In our capital projects division, and Jason Takaki, by the way, retired last year. Jaylene Urosaki is the acting program administrator. In that capital projects division, which is responsible for the CIP, we currently have 14 engineer vacancies. We're short 14 engineers right now in that one division. We can't find people to hire that would be interested in working for us. And also, when we compare our salaries with the military, the federal government, especially NAVFAC, or the private sector, we're significantly lower in compensation. And so it's been tough to compete. Thank you.
I'll add one more thing, Ernie, just, you know, based on the projections of all the work that's coming down as well, the contractor's capacity to be able to perform more projects for the BWS than they do right now is going to be severely restricted because Hawaiian Dredging just got awarded the almost $3 billion project, dry dock project at Pearl Harbor. They're going to start on Aloha Stadium, I hope, and Rail Phase 3 as well. So there are a number of huge projects coming down the pipeline, and workforce is a serious concern in our industry.
Great comments. Guy, what do you think?
You know, like, spend so much effort in trying to get the annual 21 miles, or I forget what the 1,000 rate number, but it's a little disappointing to see. But you know, the reality of a lot of things, you know, labor, supply, and stuff, it all factors in. So I think if we can fund it somehow, it would encourage, you know, their ability to hire maybe more engineers, or I mean, it sounds, you know, so optimistic, but I mean, it's just tough. We have a hard time staffing people to cut grass out on the golf course, so you know, my sympathies. The engineering is definitely much more difficult.
Yes, great points.
Thanks, Guy.
Yeah, I want to move us on to a different element of the conversation. And I don't know that we're going to get all the way through it, but it's about rate design. And the question, when Joe opened up, he said, hey, one of the objectives is to talk about whether or not these revenue increases should be even across all the tiers in residential, or whether they should be applied differently. We talked about the residential tiers a little bit during the exercise that you did on efficient water use. Single-family residential is where we're going to focus for the rest of tonight. The essential needs tier is the first 2,000 gallons per month. Anything above 2,000 gallons up to 6,000 is charged at a higher rate, and then usage from 6,000 to 30 is in the third tier, and then usage above 30,000 a month is in the top tier. 3% of water users, BWS customers, extend up into the fourth tier. 10% stay always down in the first tier, and the average usage is 9,000 a month. The median usage is 6,000 a month, which is why that tier break is there. So there's two parts to the water bill. There's those unit rates, charges per 1,000 gallons, right? That's the consumption rate. And there's the monthly charge. The monthly charge for almost all residential customers is based on 5/8 and 3/4 inch meters. You can see the current charge at $12.09 per month. If it went up uniformly at 8.4%, you can see the numbers there. The first year it would go up to $13.11, then $14.21, and so forth. So that's 8.4% even. Now, what that would look like for the usage charges, the essential needs are the first 2,000 gallons. That's $4.46 per 1,000 gallons. That would go up in the first year to $4.83, then $5.24, and so on. And you can see the monthly customer charge down at the bottom. So I've put it all onto the same graph now. And your question is, well, what does that mean in terms of a monthly bill? It means if you're the low water user, the essential needs customer, you're currently paying $21.01 per month. If your bill were to go up 8.4% per year, those are what the monthly bill amounts would look like in the next series of years. Okay? So going up right in the first year, roughly $1.68 or something like that. 76. If you're the average water user at 9,000 gallons a month, you currently pay about $60 a month, and it would go up, you know, about $5 a month for the first 3 years after that, and then a little more, right? That's 8.4% evenly spread out. If you're the high water user, in this instance using 35,000 gallons per month, you pay $230 currently. That would go to 247, then 268, then 291, then 315. Okay, again, these are just 8.4% increases each year. Sorry, wrong way. Just to compare that with average monthly bills from other utilities, using the average water customer, your bill is $64.56. Your resulting sewer bill is $110. National averages for cable, electricity, well, cable and cell phone are shown there, and then averages for electricity here in Hawaii are shown. So just putting it in the context of the rest of your utility bills. The question comes, what if we didn't increase these rates uniformly? What, in this example, for instance, if you look at the top line, we held the essential needs tier even, 0 increase. Hold it at $4.46 per 1,000 gallons, okay? That doesn't mean the bill wouldn't go up. In this instance, we'd still increase the monthly charge by 8.4%. So there'd still be a slight increase, but the usage rates would go up, would be held flat. And instead, we shift the burden of that all onto the 4th tier, the folks that are using more than 30,000 gallons a month. So here's the percentage increases. You can see essential needs tier is held at 0. The next 2 tiers are each the 8.4% average, and then tier 4 has the highest increase. Here's what the monthly bill amounts would, because you already saw the monthly bill amounts for the others. Here's what it would look like for tier 4. This is in the 8.4% example. This is with them covering the cost of holding that first 2,000 gallons at a 0% increase. Okay, so under the average, their bill would go up in the first year to 247, and the additional amount they pay in holding the essential needs tier steady would increase it to 255. Okay, so that's one way to shift it around. Now, everybody gets the benefit of holding that first 2,000 gallons at a steady rate, right? Because even the essential needs tier is paying that rate for their first 2,000 gallons. Sorry, even the high user is paying their first 2,000 gallons is at that reduced rate. Another way to lay it out, and this could be done an infinite number of ways, is let's say that instead of shifting all the burden to tier 4, we shift it to tiers 3 and 4. What would that look like, right? And so here's the percentages. Now something really interesting happens here. These are the bills for the 9,000 gallon per month customers, right? So under the 8.4% average increase, in the first year, their bill would go up to $69.99. But if we held the essential needs tier steady, under this scenario, their bill would actually be lower than the 8.4% even increase. And the reason is they're getting the benefit of that first 2,000 gallons, the rate being held steady. Right, and then you can see what it looks like for the high water users, right? It's a little more for them in this scenario than in the previous scenario. So those are some examples of rate shifting that can be done in the tiers to try and, again, as another effort to try and maintain affordability for lower income, the most vulnerable customers. Thoughts, reactions to that?
You know,
Jason?
you talked about hitting the high-end users really heavily in one of those scenarios.
Yeah.
Who are those guys? What businesses do they run?
This is residential. These aren't businesses, Bob.
And they're running 30,000 gallons.
3% of the Board of Water Supply's customers use more than 30,000 gallons per month.
Oh,
This is residential.
thirsty guys.
Yeah. Especially when you think about that exercise you just did, right? Chase, could you get a little closer to the mic, please?
I think shifting the cost to tiers 3 and 4 encourage also water conservation. So those of the people who are in tier 1 who are getting the benefit of it not increasing, and also those higher users, if they had used less water, then they pay less.
Yeah, great comment. Other thoughts on this? Charlie?
Along the lines of Bob's question, I just want to know if you're sure that the very high water users are not those that are multi-generational families that are all crammed under one roof.
Okay, so based on the exercise we did,
Right.
that was 10 people in the house. How
But
many do you want to
that's
put
an
in the
exercise,
house?
So I mean, you know, in reality, do you know if those are the demographics, or is it really like people with huge lawns that are watering them daily?
We looked into that last time. We can certainly look into that in more detail going forward. It's a great comment. Yeah. Making sure you're not hitting the multi-generational households that are living month to month and come limited. Okay, good point. Any other comments on this? Does this seem like a good idea? Does it seem like a lousy idea? Is it?
I think all things being equal, it's a good idea to shift it a little bit. I've been administering the rent and utility relief programs for DHHL ever since the first one came out with the federal government. And let me tell you, especially for Kupuna households and small households, they were really struggling, even with their utilities. So from what I've seen, I think it would help, especially since those are the households that probably have less opportunity to recover and increase their income.
Yeah, great comments. Anyone else? Okay, we are 7 minutes over. I just asked you this question. We just did some questions. I wanted to bring us to Ernie. Did you have anything else under BWS updates you want to cover?
Yes, I actually have to leave in just a few minutes for La'i. But I just want to thank the communication staff that are in the room, and actually Stephen just stepped out of the door. But Keone, Arthur, Tracy, and Linda, and Stella there, and Wayne had to leave, but they basically were doing this ourselves now. Except for Dave, we still need Dave for a little while longer, but other than that, you know, it'll be our comm staff, and they're doing a great job, so could we give them a hand? The mayor's having a town hall meeting in Laie, and I need to, unfortunately, I won't be able to hang around, but mahalo, everybody. It's great to see you again after, what is it now, 3 years of pandemic. So mahalo for coming out and still being willing to serve our community. Mahalo.
Yeah. Thank you, Ernie. Our next meetings, July 20th, Thursday, we'll be here at Blaisdell. October 19th, we'll be here at Blaisdell. We might be in different rooms, it might move around a little bit, but we're going to be here at Blaisdell. So look forward to seeing everybody in July. And thank you so much for coming out tonight and for the hugs when we came in and everything else. Really great to see you, so thank you.